Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the day or evening, this is Story by Story, and I'm Joe Doolittle.
I'm Kate Dudding.
And we're bringing you an hour of storytelling and conversations about stories and storytelling and things that are going on in the region.
Exactly.
And the most interesting thing that's going on in storytelling right now, well, Kate, what do you think it is this summer?
Well, the most fun I had in July was that I told my Julia Child stories up at Weowaka, which is on Lake George. It was created as a retreat home for women Troy factory workers, and it continues to this day, being open in the summer. And so I told an hour of stories. Then I asked the audience, do you have any memories of Julia that you would like to share? And two of the women had actually met her.
No kidding. So you picked up some more stories about
Yes.
Julia. Oh,
yes.
That's good.
And they agreed that she was charming, she was funny. One of the women was a stewardess, and she said Julia came on her plane carrying a picnic basket. And the things that came out of that picnic basket were absolutely amazing. She did say, but Julia didn't share. I said, well, she couldn't share. If she shared with you, she'd have to share with the whole plane, and then that wouldn't be enough.
And it's hard for a tall lady to stand up in a plane.
Well, she was even in economy class, and I don't know how she folded her legs into economy class.
Because she was like 6 foot tall? Or
6'2".
6'2".
And it was legs.
Yeah.
It was, she was very short-waisted and very long legs. And then Weowaka arranged to have a dinner of her recipes.
What did they serve?
Halibut that had been cooked in parchment, and sautéed zucchini, and for dessert we had a tart.
Was the dot
lemon tart.
that was the musical accompaniment?
No, I was
with the
trying to
dinner?
remember what else went with it. I think I'm missing something from the menu, but
just so you know, we have a way as storytellers of kind of acquiring a relationship with the characters that we either develop or tell stories about. And Kate has quite a deep relationship with Julia Child, and has been known to tell stories and have stacks of her cookbooks available so that when people were ready to do more of their own investigation, they could have access to original material.
Right.
So,
yes, I highly recommend her. One of her last books, that in the title are the words "Kitchen Wisdom," and it's a paperback about this size, based on her own personal kitchen notebook. And so it's a lot of techniques and some recipes. But if you want to cook fish, well, there's a paragraph on how to cook fillets that are fairly thin, and then beneath it it's another paragraph if they're thicker. So that covers fillets of fish of all varieties.
who would have known? I wouldn't have known that.
And the perfect way to scramble eggs, save a little bit of the raw eggs out, and when the scrambled eggs are just done perfectly, take them off the heat, add the remaining tablespoon or two of the raw egg mixture, and whip that in, and that will cook the raw and will stop the cooking of the already cooked, so the eggs don't get overcooked, and serve immediately.
Now, when I said that Kate had a deep relationship with this lady, you would have thought, oh, that's just talk. No, that's just more of the story. And what we're going to do in the next hour is we have a very charming, talented guest teller. Sandy Schuman is with us, and he's going to do a little reprise on an amazingly wonderful project that I think you're going to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to take a break and talk about things that are coming up over the next season for storytelling in the Capital District a little bit. And we'll talk about things we've learned from storytelling. I was in the Netherlands with the Schenectady-Nijkerk Exchange. That's our sister city. And it was the 600th anniversary of the town of Nijkerk, which is where Arent van Curler came from and settled Schenectady. And we have a good relationship. It's been going 30 years of exchanges, so even though I haven't been involved directly all that time, Gay and I know people over there, and we have friends and we have stories. And some of those will come up over the next year, but it was just a great time. And to be able to collect rich stories through your own experience is a blessing. I've decided.
Yes, storytellers are always trolling for material, so keep that in mind when you meet them.
And journaling helps catch those memories if you journal, but your own memories could be pretty good for storytelling. One other thing that's coming up that I'm working on and I'll share with you is Harlan Ratmeyer, who's my partner in storytelling along with Ken Bushman, is turning 75.
Really?
Yes, and he is having a big birthday party with Kim and Reggie Harris, who are friends of his as well, on the lawn of his church in South Bethlehem, August 17th. And it's a kind of a promotion for his church and the Center for Pastoral Care at Albany Med. And the giveaway for that is going to be a collection of his stories drawn from all the things that we've done. And it's a project underway, and they will be available in markets near you. But it's been fun because we've been telling stories about 15 years together, and they trail off into some wonderful things. So that's probably the most fun I've been doing, is getting that ready.
Excellent.
What do we know about our storyteller guest, Sandy Schuman, really?
Well, we know that he started as a facilitator and helping groups change their direction, and it was only when he got feedback from one group that said, what we loved best about this workshop was Sandy's stories. And Sandy went, my stories? Huh? And his co-workshop leader said, Sandy, you tell stories all the time. And Sandy went, maybe I'm a storyteller. As I recall, that's the story of how you realized you were a storyteller.
Well summarized.
Well summarized. Sandy Schuman is our guest today, and Sandy is a storyteller who discovered storytelling in the midst of his own profession at the Rockefeller Institute.
Close enough.
Close enough. And is a master as a group facilitator. And I'm reminded of the line that's one of the purpose of stories is to entertain and teach, so that during the lull in the meeting or the strategic planning session, you fill it with a story, but you also fill it with a story that has some connection with what folks are trying to get done. So it becomes directional, it becomes teaching. And Sandy, they remember the story. They may even remember the storyteller, but folks remember the story. So it's great to have you here. Great to have you here.
Well, thanks very much.
And Sandy, we've known Sandy over the years as a very able storyteller and colleague in Story Circle of the Capital District.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're working on a story, it's great to tell it to Sandy, because he'll point out things very kindly that are confusing, he thinks maybe could do some work, or that are working. So I greatly appreciate you as a member of Story Circle.
All right.
Thank you.
Sandy, you are a master of kind of targeted, astute feedback, helpful feedback. Actually, even sometimes when you're not helpful, it's still helpful. So that's really, no, I mean, I just had to say that.
Thanks.
It's true.
Well, I mean, we give what a boss of mine used to say, well, my 5-second analysis on that is, so it's but we all, at our meetings, we always say, this is advice that the teller can take or not. And of course, they've spent more time than 5 seconds with their stories.
Now, as I remember part of the story, your dad was a storyteller too.
Well, yes, short answer.
Yes, and in fact, you have a CD by that very same name. My father was a storyteller.
That's right. That's right.
And not by declaration or business card, but that's just the way he talked.
Now, are your kids storytellers?
Oh, they don't tell stories to me.
That you
But they tell
recognize.
stories about you.
They always tell the truth, right?
Yeah, even if they have to lie to do it.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Sandy, one of the things that's really intrigued me about your work as a storyteller, and I will talk about it as work because there's discipline and there's a lot of energy and time that goes into creating a story, is your discovery of, I'll say this wrong, Chelm Pond in the Adirondacks. I screwed it up already, didn't I? Helm Pond.
I told you to let Kate say it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
Just not, every time you want to,
I'll just say it.
The discovery of Helm's
or
Pond.
the invention of Helm's Pond.
Well, first let's get the Helm part straight. If you quick lesson in how to say the ches, all right? Ches, it's a letter,
Yes.
or chet. If you just kind of sit quietly and relax and swallow, and just notice how you're swallowing, and at the end of the swallow, you'll notice that the back of your tongue is at the back of your throat. And you just leave it there. And instead of concluding the swallow by opening that back of your throat thing, just keep it closed and then just breathe through it. Well, you're adding a vowel already.
All right.
You know, as a beginner, you really need to just work on, see, there you go.
Yiddish has no vowels. Okay. Helm.
Right, Helm. Okay, so I do have an affection for Helm stories, which are the Jewish Eastern European version of the culturally widely available fool story, the noodle, the village idiot sort of character. And for reasons which I think are intriguing, you know, why do people like those stories? Why do kids like those stories? That's a whole thing we could talk about. The same applies to tall tales. I think there's a lot in common between the fool story and the tall tale, but yet they're different. So how do you exactly distinguish those? So I had this affection for Helm stories, and I had a lot of Helm stories and other stories that would fit into that motif. And I had this idea that I should bring, you know, sort of modernize them, bring them into this century, or at least the 20th, and bring them into New York. Why not? Have them move from Eastern Europe to New York. So, of course, I cranked up MapQuest and Google, and I'm looking for Helm. And there's Chelmsford in Massachusetts.
Chelmsford, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
In English, it's Chelm. Did we go over that?
Well, you got that straight. Okay. But that was in Massachusetts, and I wanted New York. So there is no Chelm, Chelm, in New York. So I tried an anglicized spelling, just like Hanukkah might be spelled in English with an H. I looked for Helm, and I found Helm's Pond, which happens to be named after David Helm, a forester, conservation officer.
He was from Chelmsford, Massachusetts.
No, but Hamilton County in New York's central Adirondacks. So and there's a pond, it's Helm's Pond, which I have seen. It's very difficult to get to. I tried to get there. You'd need a weed whack, you'd need a machete or very good logging equipment or a flamethrower. It's just very dense, but I've seen it from the top of Castle Rock, which is a peak just north of Blue Mountain Lake. Anyway, I decided that they moved to Helm's Pond. So there's the answer to your question.
Right there. Now, you decided to transpose the stories, updating the century, and place these old Hasidic folk stories in the middle of the Adirondacks?
In a nutshell, although they're not Hasidic,
Hasidic,
they're just Eastern European Jewry. The Hasidic tales are by nature a little bit different yet.
But that moving of stories has been going on for centuries, because people would hear stories and they would move with them. Like there's a tradition in Great Britain for Jack tales. And we know Jack and the Giant Killer. But when the people moved to Appalachia, you know, if you're living in a holler and you're looking for your next meal, a singing harp may not be the most prized possession that you'd want to steal, but an axe that never goes dull. So
great.
when that story moved, they updated it to make it relevant to the listeners, for example. And that's just one of many, many, many examples of tales traveling and being altered so the listeners could relate to them, though relate to them was not something that
Right.
an expression that they were using in the 1700s or whatever.
Well, in a similar fashion, one of the stories in my book, is this where I can plug my book?
Your book.
Yes.
Plug your book.
This is the book cover, see?
Adirondack.
Adirondack Mendel's Ufruf, Welcome to Helms Pond, illustrated by Kevin Kuhn. One of the stories in the book is a traditional Helm story, which might go under the title of the trip to Warsaw or the way to paradise, but it involves a character from Helm, the village of fools, deciding that he wants to see the world and he's going to go to Warsaw or alternatively paradise. And so he walks along the road, or he gets his donkey or his horse-drawn cart, and it's a long trip. He stops along the way, and so that he's able to pick up the direction in the morning, he leaves his shoes on the ground pointing toward Warsaw. And some fellow travelers come by and he suggests, you might want to do the same so you don't wake up and start heading in the other direction. And they figure this guy's not all there. And they play a trick on him and turn his shoes 180 degrees. He gets up in the morning and he walks back to Helm, but he thinks he's now in Warsaw or paradise. And he walks up to this house. It looks just like his house. And he's greeted by these children who look just like his children, and so on. So I updated that story, and the character who goes on the trip is Bloomy, who's already got a reputation as the one who can't find the hole in the bagel, a few colors short of a rainbow. And she gets a motorcycle. That's how she's going to travel. And but the basic story is the same. She goes down Route 30, can't go on the big highway, and stops just south of Amsterdam in a field, and a motorcycle gang happens to come up, and they play this trick on her and turn her motorcycle and they reset her GPS. See, I threw in a GPS just to make it a little bit more contemporary, and she's got paradise is where she's headed, and she's got the coordinates there, and they switch the coordinates to her home coordinates. So she gets on the motorcycle, thinks she's going to paradise, but she's heading back to Helm. And it's the same story.
But that really is paradise for her. That's the wisdom in it?
Yes. The underlying both tales is this idea that you could say there's no place like home. That what makes paradise is that everything is the same, but it seems new. And if you can do that every day, that's about as close to paradise as we can get.
There you go.
The other thing that I built in was that, Bloomy in the written version of my story insists that she's in paradise, but everybody else says, Bloomy or Meshuggah, this is Helm. And this argument goes back and forth, and her parents intervene and try and convince everybody not to make an issue out of it, and after a while, Bloomy stops making an issue out of it. And so paradise is a place where people accept each other's foolishness, which would be a nice day if it would happen.
Maybe you could send a dose of that story down to the U.S. Senate, I think. You've just given us the cliff notes of a story. Do you have another story you could tell us?
Well, I could. Funny you should ask. Obviously, the opportunity to move Chelm, the village of fools, into the Adirondacks, the opportunity was to take this fool genre of story and the Adirondack tall tale and put them next to each other and kind of play around with these two different motifs in one collection of stories. And so that's what I did. But if you don't mind, I'll just tell you a regular old Adirondack tall tale, not from the book. I don't want to push the book too much. And
I have a slide on that too.
Okay. Paul Bunyan is from the Great Northwest. Pecos Bill is from the Southwest.
Texas.
Johnny Appleseed, Midwest. John Chapman from Ohio. John Henry is from the Great South. Where's the tall tale character from the Northeast? And as a kid, I was really troubled by this. This was disturbing to me. And so when Mrs. Flood, our second grade substitute teacher, told us, Mrs. Flood, she introduced herself, "My name is Mrs. Flood. When I walk down the street," where's that water when I need it?
Speaking of floods.
When I walk down the street with all my children walking behind me, the neighbors say, "There goes Mrs. Flood with all her little puddles." Now, students, I tell you that story so that you'll remember my name, Mrs. Flood. And more than 50 years later, I remember Mrs. Flood's name. So she told this story about Bill Greenfield, and she said Bill Greenfield was from upstate New York. And she had my attention. So here's the story she told. Bill decided that he was going to spend a whole year long up in the Adirondacks all by himself just to prove that it could be done. Now, that's no big challenge, spring, summer, fall, but the winter, of course, is the big challenge. Well, he started right off in the spring to get a good start, planted a garden, which attracted a lot of rabbits and deer, so he had plenty to eat, mostly rabbits and deer. But by the time winter came early that year, September. And he had pretty much all he needed stored away. And boy, did it snow that year. He had to tunnel his way out the front door, and there was no point to it because all he got was more snow. Look up at the snow roof. So he gave up on leaving the place, and he just stayed there himself, which was not a bad idea because it was so cold. You know how the Adirondacks get to be really cold, and probably everybody knows that it's so cold when you talk, the words just freeze in the air. So there's a real danger in the spring of hearing loss because people tend to talk louder so that the words go a little bit further before they freeze. And if they end up really shouting to try and be heard, then the words freeze. And in the spring, when it all soars at once, the noise is so much you can go deaf. So it's just as well you don't talk at all. Well, come April, there were still a few more weeks of winter to go, and he was out of food. So he had to go out, do a little hunting. And there was a stream close by which was still running. It hadn't frozen over because the water went so fast it never had time to freeze. He was afraid to dip anything into it because he figured it'd just freeze right up immediately. Anyway, he got down the long rifle from on top of the mantelpiece. He rummaged around, only found one piece of lead shot, which was really all he needed. He took after his father Abner, just an excellent marksman, excellent hunter. Probably not as good as Abner, but anyway, he put the gunpowder in, he put the shot in, and went outside. And before long, of course it's so cold, he had to put on every stitch of clothing available in the cabin, including the waders, because he just needed that insulation. It was so cold. And he heads out, and before long he spots a deer, and he's about ready to take aim, and then he sees there's another deer over there. And right in the middle, he sees this outcropping, where the stone underneath the ground, it's not much soil in the Adirondacks, it sticks right out, and there's a sharp edge to that outcropping. So he aims right for that sharp edge, shoots, the shot comes out, splits, and kills both deer. Well, that was great, but the kickback from that rifle was so strong it sent Bill on his back. He falls into the stream. Instantly, that water freezes inside his waders, and he lets out such a scream it goes up into the sky before it freezes right around a goose that happened to be flying by at that instant. The goose drops like a stone to the ground. Bill lurches himself out of the stream, grabs that goose, brings it into the cabin to have for dinner. It wasn't until then, in the heat of the stove cooking, that the ice in his waders melted, and that's when he became aware that he'd captured 2 brown trout and a mallard duck. And that was the first introduction I had to Bill Greenfield, the gall darndest liar. So there's the tall tale. There's in the T10, if I could wax eloquent here on the nature of tall tales, the T10, that's the, let me see if I can remember the title correctly. The Tall Tale Teller's Triumph, Telling Techniques Tried, True, and Trustworthy, the T10. It talks about, how to tell a tall tale, what makes a tall tale, and one of the issues here is credibility. And so, simply saying, this guy has a name, and there's, he's a real person.
Had a father named Abner.
Had a father named Abner. He's a real person from upstate New York. That's kind of geographical and ancestral credibility. You've got some plausibility, another big component. Adirondacks, it's cold. The winter starts early, it ends late. A little bit exaggerated, and that introduces the third element, which is the exaggeration or outrageousness, the implausible. But you build the implausible on top of the plausible and just extend it. And somewhere in there's got to be some kind of appeal. It's the weakest chapter in the book. It's really hard, in my judgment, my personal judgment, it's really hard to establish objectively what makes for the appeal.
You mean making the story appealing?
Appealing, right. Something endearing. It's partly it's cleverness in extending the plausible into the implausible. But I think it's really difficult to put your finger on what makes the tall tale appealing. Of course, some people hear tall tale and they're heading for the exit door. Mm-hmm. It's not appealing at any form. But the last... I
felt sympathetic when, he was stuck inside. Not only was he alone, but he was stuck inside.
And getting hungry. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I didn't include the part about the polar bear that he brought in and taught him how to play cards, but then, he caught him cheating, so he had to shoot him.
Polar bears in the Adirondacks.
It was a cold winter, Kate. It was so cold.
The polar bears came down from...
I was trying to limit the duration.
Well, you wanted to cut the violence out. You had the hunting and the deer.
Wait till you hear the other story I'm going to tell.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to get back to the appeal, because I think, you can remember Mrs. Flood telling you that story in the 2nd grade. And I think part of the appeal is maybe the context of the teller and the audience, that they volunteered or they're there together. And out of that beginning connection, the story becomes another connection. Mm-hmm. And they kind of treasure that connection, mm-hmm. or it has a certain appeal.
Yeah. Judith Black, when she gave Story Circle a workshop several years ago, I remember part of her critique of my story is the audience is first developing and a connection with the teller, and then through the teller to the story.
Right.
And
That's a good
so
one.
this personal thread, these personal threads, are drawing people in.
Right. I think that's true, and some part of that appeal happens because, whatever the word appeal means, the story is first appealing to the teller.
Oh, right.
Otherwise, you shouldn't be telling it.
Right.
Right.
And so if it's appealing to the teller and you have that social interpersonal connection between the teller and the audience, then some of that appeal stretches out. Nonetheless, I still think it's difficult to pin down. I should, just for completeness though, I should note that the final chapter in the T10, it talks about sincerity. And it concludes by saying that the key to success in telling tall tales is sincerity. When you can fake that, you've got it made.
Yeah.
Oh,
Be very sincere when you're telling tall tales and lies.
I think we need to maybe just take a little break and talk about what's happening in the next month or so on the storytelling schedule. And then we'll come back to sincerity, Sandy. And I think that's thank you.
Oh, I wouldn't believe him.
I wouldn't
don't
believe
think-
him.
We're not coming back to you at all. No,
No,
just
no.
joking. Just joking. Okay. Oh, one of the reasons why Sandy is here is because he's one of the tellers in the Not Just for Kids storytelling series this year. That happens at the Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site in Fort Hunter, Sundays at 6 p.m. starting. Well, this is the August show, so it's already started on July 28th with Beth Horner. And then Sandy comes telling the gall-darndest, so that's how you spell that. That's interesting. The gall-darndest liar and the great American hoax. And other tellers, including Karen Pillsworth, who's been on this show. She'll be here at Fort Hunter on August 25th. And I'll be there on September 8th telling Women Who Made a Difference, True Stories About American Women.
And actually, Schoharie Crossing is a wonderful place for a picnic. The storytelling happens at 6 o'clock, so you can get there 5-ish. There are picnic facilities right along the Schoharie Creek. And there's some interesting things. The flood a couple of years ago washed up the foundations of the old Fort Hunter. And so they're there, and there's a good display about that. There's a wonderful bike path that runs about 6 or 7 miles through Fort Hunter in that part of the world if you want to bring your bike. And it's just beautiful and serene and peaceful. And I encourage people to get out to this free program that's offered there for like 6 weeks, 6 Sunday nights in late summer. What else we got going on?
Well, this is something, one of your gigs. In Schuylerville, their 18th Century Day this year. That sounds a little weird. Their 18th Century Day this year is going to be on August 11th, noon to 5. This is at the General Philip Schuyler House, not the mansion in Albany, the house in Schuylerville.
Well, it's a wonderful festival in a way of 1700s history and Americana. There'll be live animals and sheep shearing, brewing of beer, making a rope. There are tours of the house, and the house stands as, I think, one of the best examples of magnanimity, about forgiveness. Philip Schuyler was a general in the American Revolution. He lived in Albany, and he was the logistical coordinator of the defense of the Northeast. And he was replaced by his commander, by the Congress, before the Battle of Saratoga, so he was moved to the sidelines. But the British actually retreated before they surrendered, and they retreated through Schuylerville. And the day before they surrendered, they burned his house. And if you go to the picture of the surrender at Saratoga, he's in a very dark brown suit way over on the side. It's in the picture. But after Burgoyne had surrendered, he came up to him and introduced himself and invited Burgoyne and his entourage to stay in his house in Albany, that he had already sent word to his wife to be prepared to host Burgoyne. And Burgoyne said, "And aren't you coming?" And Schuyler said, "Oh no, I have to start rebuilding my house." And he never said that you burned, you son of a gun. But Burgoyne knew, and they parted company. And that next day, Schuyler got his crew together, and they hadn't burned his sawmill, so he could begin to mill timber. But the house you'll tour is the house he rebuilt after the British burned it down, in a real kind of throwing a fig at him on their way in retreat.
Well, when the British retreated from Boston, as this was, the British held the harbor in Boston, the rebels held the neck, the land access. It was Boston's actually a peninsula, and so the war was at a stalemate there until the winter of when Fort Ticonderoga was recaptured, and Ethan Allen, not Ethan
Henry
Allen.
Knox.
Henry Knox and his men dragged the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga all the way to Boston, placed the cannon up on Dorchester Heights, and on March 17, the British woke up in the harbor and went, "Look at all those cannon. Maybe today's a good day to leave Boston." But their parting shot, literally, was they blew up the lighthouse, the Boston Lighthouse. So that too was rebuilt after the British left.
Just to weave the stories together, the sleds that those cannon traveled on from Ticonderoga and the oxen that pulled them were organized and built by Philip Schuyler in the sawmill that used to sit right on the creek behind that house. So if you want some of those historical stories and some wonderfully good, fine food, fun conversation, come on out on the 18th of
the 11th.
The 11th of August, and it's a great day and it's free. So there you go.
Okay, and then the last event that I know of, but you might have something up your sleeve, is that a little south of Albany is Socrates, New York, and there's a monthly series there, Stories for Inquiring Minds, run by one of our members, Janet Carter, who was recently with us. And on August 28th, Marnie Gillard will be sharing the mic with her, telling our truths. So that's Wednesday, August 28th. I don't have a time. I believe it's 7 o'clock.
I believe it's 7 o'clock, and if you check in, our emails and things are on our website. Often there's a little dinner gathering, supper gathering in Socrates before that, and that may be going on, and an opportunity for fellowship and conversation. And I don't have anything else up my sleeve, believe it or not.
Well, I could add that on July 30th, I'm going to be at East Line Books in Clifton Park at 6:30.
Okay.
Telling stories from my book.
Okay, that's July 30th. East Line Books.
East Line Books, Clifton Park.
East Line Books. Okay, right. The time was
6:30.
6:30. Okay.
All right, we'll do that.
We'll add that slide to our collection. Okay, so we have officially 20 minutes left.
Well, you know what I'd like to do?
What would you like to do?
A lot of people bring music into their storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a song and story. I'm sitting next to Joe Doolittle here, who is apt to burst out in song at any moment.
Do little, sing a lot.
Yeah, huh?
Thank you.
And so I've given some thought to how I could bring some music into my storytelling. And in fact, as it turns out, you mentioned my CD. My father was a storyteller. He was also a songwriter. That's part of that story. And I ended up writing introductions that I'd use before singing one of his songs. And the introductions got to be longer than the song. So people know the story more than they know the song that the story introduces. But the the typical instrument that people play is the guitar, and I can play the guitar, but it's really not my instrument. I would dare say that my instrument is the Jew's harp, which I will claim is the most popular instrument on this planet, all time. Going back to...
You mean you're talking about in the historical perspective as
well?
well?
Historically, for sure, it's a very inexpensive instrument. Here's a large Jew's harp. Let me put it up on something with a background so you can see it better.
Highly portable.
Highly portable. And I'm blocking it. I should have rehearsed how to hold this thing. There it is. So it's very inexpensive. It's used around the world, probably developed independently. I have a list of the names because I can never remember. It's known as the Trump, the G-Jaw, the Komuz, Mungiga, Drumbia, Vargan. That's as far as I go. There may be other names for it. It's a single reed instrument.
Single reed instrument.
So there's two parts to it. There's the body, which has this, in the Western European version, has this shape, has these two arms, and there's a tongue that moves back and forth. And if you actually hold it up to your ear, actually I brought a couple for you guys to experiment with. And here's mine. Now, these have been sanitized, so you don't have to worry about communicable diseases.
Okay.
So here's the technique. First, you hold the Jew's harp firmly. If you're right-handed, that would be hold it on your left hand with the
Left hand.
left hand with the tang pointing out.
Yeah.
tang
Okay.
point.
You notice there's an upper arm and a lower arm of the body. The upper arm goes on your top teeth. Don't do it yet. You'll get hurt. The lower arm goes on your lower teeth, and you press it firmly against your teeth, leaving enough space so that the tongue can move back and forth. So you just experiment first by moving the tongue. Make sure it'll go back and forth without banging your teeth.
I don't have a lot of front teeth. That's my problem.
Sure, you do. Use your lips then. You can do it against your lips.
Okay, and you're supposed to. There's the part of the tang that has an angle.
A hook,
and
yeah.
A hook, and you're supposed to flick it with your thumb forward. Flick your thumb
Actually,
forward.
towards your mouth.
Towards your mouth.
Yeah.
Does that hit your teeth?
It's going to go waver back and forth no matter how you pluck it. And you close off the back of it's like doing the ches. You close off the back of your mouth with the back of your tongue, so Kate's got it. So
Because you're making a chamber.
right, you're making a resonator out of your mouth. And then if you move your tongue back and forth, you get that overtone. All right, well, you guys can practice. So here, if you will, I'll just give you a very brief overview of Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
I've always wanted to try one of these, but
Well-
now I have.
You can. So you remember the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. One day, the three bears sat down to a table of porridge, and the Papa Bear said, "This porridge is too hot." And the Mama Bear the morning song,
Morning song.
Salvage, Peer Gynt Suite,
Thank you.
said, "Yeah, that's too hot too." And the baby bear said, "And mine's too hot too." And then, of course, Goldilocks comes in later in the story. So you get the idea. It's theme music for Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But Not that you should think that that's all you can do with a Jew's harp. This is a Vargan. This one's made in Russia. It's a more modern design. Just hold on a second.
Bonanza!
Yeah, well, that's a little generational, but yes.
That was a TV show. It was color then, but
Right.
It was
the
early
first
color.
color TV show.
Now,
network
when
TV
that
show.
works, you actually control the scale,
Yes.
pitch by the tension on your bar.
No. The pitch is controlled by the size of the resonator. So it's really, the Jew's harp only plays one note. Whoops. That's the only note.
But how
It's
did
your mouth that's producing overtones, and the shape, the size of your mouth. It's physics.
So that's
So
how you
your-
get
your
the scale.
tongue
So
is
if I move my,
occupying
if
more
I
of
make
your
my
mouth?
mouth small, move my tongue up forward, like the letter E, as opposed to an O.
so it's your tongue that's changing the size of the cavity.
The tongue and the rest of your mouth, just as you were singing, you're
Right,
changing. You there, of course, are using your vocal cords too, and there are other techniques that involve breathing, so you get other kinds of sounds.
Wow. I had no idea.
I told you that.
I had no
it's-
idea.
This is my instrument.
This is your instrument.
So.
So that's, and the different sizes just is the pitch that you started. So there you go.
Right, it's the native note. So if I do this, whoops. I don't know if we can pick that up,
Dogs are going crazy.
but that's a high note, and that's going to make a lower note. And by gosh, you can get a chromatically tuned set of these harps. It's much bigger in Europe and in Asia than it is in the United States. Although there is a North American Jew's Harp Festival in Oregon or Washington, somewhere in the Northwest. There's the International Jew's Harp Festival. My best understanding of why it's called a Jew's Harp, which is the name that the guilds and societies use, although there's all these local names. The best explanation I've heard is that in Europe, these little instruments were carried by peddlers, typically Jewish peddlers, who had to peddle because they weren't allowed to own land or join any of the guilds. So among the various wares that they sold would be these Jew's harps.
Vargans. And
Vargans, mungias, drumbias, trumps, G-jaw, right? So it has been referred to as a jaw harp, but historically that apparently has no basis whatsoever. So we go with the best guess.
Oh. A good story.
Well, the most popular instrument in the world.
Most popular. How are we doing on time?
we have 9 minutes left. Do you have an 8-minute story?
I do now. Well, so I wouldn't want to leave you with just one impression of Bill Greenfield's prowess as an Adirondack character. And of course, I assumed that, like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill, he was just a made-up character. But as I read more stories, and I'd see one collection or another, I came across something that said that he was from the town of Edinburgh, which is in Saratoga County. So that was consistent with upstate New York and, Adirondack character and stuff like that. But I still wasn't convinced that he was a real person, and I'll leave that as the cliffhanger for today. But one story that I came across that actually had an introduction that said that he was buried in the Clarkville Cemetery. Now, again, if you're going to establish credibility for a tall tale, this is, he's in the town of Edinburgh. Right, it's Clarkville Cemetery. I didn't even know at the time if there was a place called Clarkville or a Clarkville Cemetery. So he made some of his living as an Adirondack guide. And he had a particular customer from New York City who would come up periodically, a couple times a year even, and go hunting and fishing. They became very good friends. And over the campfire one night, this fellow from New York City is bragging about the really terrific restaurants in New York City, and it's such a shame, Bill, that you live up here in the woods and there's no restaurants like that. And I'll tell you, my favorite meal in one of those restaurants is frog's legs, and they're mighty expensive. You couldn't probably afford them, Bill, but it's the best meal you ever had. And Bill looks at him, askance. I don't do askance very well. He looks askance. He says, "What, you pay for frog's legs? Well, you come up here in the spring, and I'll get you all the frog's legs you can eat." Well, the guy can't resist, so he schedules a visit with Bill, and he comes up the following spring, and they head out when it's still dark out. Cold morning. The ice has left the lakes and ponds, but it's very chilly. And Bill tells this guy, "Now you lay down here on the ground next to this little pond," and they can hear the frogs croaking around the pond. And he says, "You take this rock," and he hands him a good hand-sized rock, and he says, "Now, when I give you the signal, you take that rock and you smash it down on this boulder." And here's this, you can just see the crown of this boulder coming up over the grass. "When I give you the signal, you smash that hand rock into that boulder." And Bill stands there, and he's got this big, long, sharp knife in his arm that he's holding out. And they're just kind of poised like that, and it's dark, and you can see the sun beginning to creep up over the horizon. Now you know that scientifically, that's how Bill would say it, scientifically, you know that it's coldest just after the sun rises, because all night long on a cloudless night like tonight, the earth is radiating out heat, and once the sun comes up, the earth is still losing heat until the sun is strong enough to have a net heat gain. It's coldest after sunrise. And so they're waiting there. And finally, just as the sun is coming up, Bill gives the signal, and this guy from New York City, he takes that hand rock and he pounds the boulder in the ground and makes this great thud, and the ground vibrates. And all the frogs that are grouped around the pond jump into the water just as a thin film of ice forms over the little pond. And Bill takes his razor-sharp knife and skims it along the ice, and those little frog legs stuck in the ice, all cut off. They had a nice meal of frog's legs for breakfast. I told you it was a little more violent.
I think you had everything going for you about your T10. You had everything going, and I like the credibility part. I mean about Bill, and I'm after cutting off all those frogs' legs, I'm glad he's dead. No, I'm serious. Great story, actually. I didn't know where you were going with it, actually.
That's the rock and and the knife over there, and
but it has plausibility, right?
Right. Well, and scientifically, since the sun is heating the air at the hot top, it's holding the cold air down.
Scientifically.
Scientifically. And then there's the story about the ducks that settled on a lake that froze, and then they flew off with the lake, and that's why there's no more lake something or other somewhere. Yeah. Same scientifically phenomena.
Scientific phenomena. We've learned a new word, and we've learned how to play a new instrument.
Right.
Yeah, and some of us have learned how to pronounce a ches.
A ches.
Hey.
Ches. Sandy, it has been just delightful. And do we have a little bon mot for the end of this little hour together?
A little bon mot. Well, of course, when you say bon mot, that's French, and that reminds me of Julia Child ending her TV show saying bon appetit. It's a little known fact why she was called the French chef. That show was called The French Chef, her first show, because she was neither French nor a chef. Did you ever think of that? But it was actually because they needed a short title to fit in TV Guide, and French Chef fit. So
Scientifically, it fit.
Scientifically, it fit. Well, she decided in one of the early shows to end with Bon Appetit, and that became her signature phrase. Once, when she was waiting in an airport for her connection, she was there with her longtime assistant. The assistant was people watching. Julia was reading a newspaper. And the assistant noticed this guy rushing towards him, clearly trying to catch his connection. Tall cowboy hat, cowboy boots. He was rushing. And then he saw Julia. He slowed right down and very slowly walked past them. And the assistant thought, well, that's it. But no, all of a sudden he was right back in front of them. He looked down at Julia, down because she was sitting down. And he looked down at her and said, "Bon appetit, Julia." And Julia looked up at him and smiled and said, "Bon appetit to you too."
Well, I think we've had Julia Child as the last word, although we've had many fine words from Sandy Schuman, our guest.
And I think Sandy was poised to give us a tune on his Vargan.
Well, you can never go wrong with I'm sorry, I'm looking at Kate and I can't stop laughing.
I was trying to laugh as silently as possible.
Let it not be said you can't play classical music.
That's true. That is, I'm in awe, Sandy. I was in awe of your ability as a storyteller, as an author, and now as a musician. I just don't know which to applaud first.
Yeah. This is Kate Dudding.
Joe Doolittle.
Thanking you for joining us on Story by Story, Sharing the Human Experience. We hope you'll come back next month.
In spite of the human experience we've shared.
Goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,